I feel like everything is different between hip-hop now and the way that hip-hop used to be in the 1970s with Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five.
The pale-faced media tells us we all going to hell, but maybe we just the first ones to light the fire.
The Get Down, as Flash would say, is the piece of music in any musical work that contains an instrumental break. It's the bit that contains the beats. It can be a drum solo, and that beat or that series of pieces of instrumental music are what Flash put together endlessly to keep the dancers dancing on the dance floor. And the beats also provide the backdrop for a spoken word poetry, which eventually became rap.
When you went into the offices of the Get Down, when we were first developing it, literally every wall space had an image. There'd be images of gangs from the Bronx, images of disco dancers, clothes from the 70s. So the whole space was very immersive in that era. And also they did an amazing amount of detail work on the Bronx. So literally there was a map of the Bronx in the office, which had every nightclub from the 70s, identify where it was, its relationship to things. Because one of the things when you watch the show, at the very end you have a wonderful scene where Shaolin points out the different kingdoms. That comes out of the understanding of geography. The people say hip-hop comes out of the South Bronx. But really when you look at the Bronx, you realize Herc is way in the west. Bambaataa in the east. So the sense of giving a more holistic vision of what the Bronx was is part of what the show does.
Universal DJ Rule 17, Grasshopper.
In order to fly, a DJ must trust his wings.
And are these your wings?
Yes, Grandmaster.
Well, I feel like everything is different between hip-hop now and the way that hip-hop used to be in the 1970s with Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five. You know, I feel like it was at its, obviously, the beginning in the raw stages, and now it's developed into something that's totally different to where anybody can make a song if you have a phone. You know what I'm saying? When back in the day you had to go through so much with recording it actually on the tape and not being able to go back in Pro Tools and edit and not being able to add auto-tune and do different things to it. It made it a whole different thing that only the most dedicated and the most focused people and the smartest people would do. So, you know, it had you knew that if somebody was on a record that they knew how to record themselves on a record, and they knew that everything it took to get it made and everything. So there was a respect between lyricists and MCs back in the day that I feel like is still here now, but it's very, very different.
One of the most interesting things about the show is that the people that were at the inception of this musical form are actually still alive. So we were very lucky to have the oral histories of Herc, of Grandmaster Flash, of Afrika Bambaataa, because they were there right at that very inception. And a lot of people who were alive in the 70s were actually part of our writing crew. We also have Nelson George, who is probably the preeminent historian of hip-hop music. So the interesting thing was that on the one hand, it was very classic research with books and photography and going back to documentary sources, but at the same time there was a lot of consultation and oral history.
We went to tell 77, 78 and perhaps 79, depending on where we land. But the truth is, this is a unique period because although Flash says it's not really the prehistory, Flash says it very well. Everyone wants to know about the cake. Well, the cake is the 80s, right? No one wants to know about the recipe. Well, we've done the recipe show. How did it come about? Where was it from? Disco is dominant, punk is beginning, you know. So the truth is, you're right. What's extraordinary is in the last month of the decade, December, you go from no one's ever heard of a thing called rhyming over records to there are 5 of them in the charts. So it's such a transitional moment. So I know where you're going, and the question is, I don't know, will there be an 80s? Nelson, how's your energy?
There will be an 80s, believe me.
There was an 80s.